You just waiting for me?
I'm waiting for you. And you're waiting for me, right?
That's all right. Okay. Morning, Steve, or good evening. How are you today?
Hi, Phil. I'm doing real well. Thank you. And yourself?
Oh, not too bad. It's Easter weekend, and so it's a little bit relaxed. Work from home is just the same every day, um, regardless of weekends.
Yeah, so is not working from home and being retired. It's even better.
Yeah. So I think this discussion today is going to be an interesting one. I know we've had the odd little chat about it, but the topic today is starting to get into the AVC, the Advanced Variant Configurator. So I think a good starting point, because not everyone's, let's say, in the AVC bubble. So can you just perhaps talk to about how the AVC came about in the first place?
Sure. Back in 2014, I was questioning SAP on the configuration workgroup forums as to what was coming from a configuration standpoint in S/4HANA. And as a result of that, in 2015, SAP started what they called a research project. And we had, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 customer companies that were involved in that research project. And the goal of that was to find out if, A, were customers interested in a new configurator, and B, were the requirements of those various customers, because we were a cross-industry group, both US and European. So they wanted to know if the requirements were similar enough that they could boil it all down and build one thing and make everybody happy. And at the end of 2015, in that research project, the answer was, yeah, we think everybody wants something new, and the requirements are a little bit different, but they're close enough that we think we can build something. So the folks at SAP actually had to go to the board of directors at SAP to get approval for this, because let's face it, it's a multi-million-dollar or euro project with a lot of folks. And the board gave them approval in January, I think it was, of 2016. And by March 1st, I think SAP had hired 30 plus people to work on this. I think we had our first actual customer council meeting in Waldorf in June of 2016 to actually, as a honest to God, approved project AVC council. We had met multiple times before that as the research group, but the honest to God project with all the developers and so forth started in 2016.
Yeah.
And we had biweekly calls.
Yep.
Where SAP would ask us questions about our requirements, and we'd do homework. Every company would do homework, and the council grew to about, I think it was 27 customer companies at that time. Still just US and Europe. We couldn't figure out the whole Asian time frame in order to get folks from Asia involved, which is sad, but that's the way it goes, right? So in 2017, SAP released the first iteration of the AVC, and as you said, it stands for Advanced Variant Configuration, and that was in release 1709. SAP was using agile methodologies, so it was a very bare bones configurator, right? Using,
Yeah.
you know, as a single level, and that's about it. Um, So that's how the customer council came about. The customer council is still working with SAP. They still meet biweekly, virtually on the
Yeah.
web. They try to meet at least twice a year physically in Waldorf.
Yeah.
Of course, with this COVID thing, and I hope everybody's doing well from that perspective. But those customer council meetings have probably been called off until the fall.
Yeah.
So work continues because the AVC is not yet at the endpoint that SAP has said they wanted to get to.
Yeah. And because that endpoint, is there a date on that at this point? What the endpoint is planned to be?
Well, you know how SAP plans are, right? They're
Mm.
always subject to change, and the roadmaps that are out there, and you can see them at roadmaps.sap.com, or if you're a member of the configuration work group, SAP publishes them there. Currently, they go out to 2022.
Okay.
Originally, they stopped in 2019.
Yeah.
So, you know, every
Yeah.
year they move out a little bit farther. And I don't know what the actual true end date will be.
No, no. And we covered that a little bit in our previous post about some
Yep.
of those timelines. So, so at this point, how far are we with the, like?
Okay, can you see my screen, Phil?
Yeah, I can. It's very big.
Okay, so this is a little something I tried to do to say, and there's two of them that I'm going to share with you.
Yeah.
One's from a functional perspective, that's what we're going to talk about now, and the other one's from a technical perspective. Okay? And this doesn't get to everything. It's a very high level. True details are going to be found in the configuration workgroup document share. All right? But basically, you know, most people that I am aware of, typically with larger models, complain about performance in LOVC.
Yeah, that's true.
SAP did a performance test with a fairly large model. I can't remember which automaker it was. It was a European automaker's model. And they measured the AVC at 10 times faster than LOVC. Okay? LOVC is proprietary, meaning it's something that SAP developed from the ground up. SAP owns it, you know, and sorry, the only way you can influence anything is through SAP, and let's be blunt, they haven't wanted any influence on the LOVC for 20 years. The AVC, on the other hand, is an open source constraint engine. It uses a open source piece of software called G-code, C++, with an ABAP layer over it. So SAP puts an ABAP layer over it so that it can run within, you know, Fiori and so forth and so on.
Yep.
So that actually gives you more opportunity to influence. You know, you can go to gcode.org and influence through there, or you can influence through SAP. Stop me whenever you have a question, Phil.
I'm fine so far. You're answering my questions as you go. So,
okay.
Yep.
So, you know, LOVC, let's face it, it's very easy for a user to make a mistake in LOVC. And that's because, I mean, I don't want to give the designers of LOVC a bad rap, but they didn't really inherently design it to eliminate mistakes. It's a procedural engine more than anything else. Even though you can do constraint solving in it, it started as a procedural engine and they added constraints on top of it.
Yeah. No,
I think AVC,
yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think that's right, and I think the secret with modeling in LOVC is you have to make sure you model with those possible mistakes in mind, because I've seen users, they can get themselves into horrible corners sometimes if they're allowed to click all over the place. So the model design becomes quite important sometimes with the LOVC.
Well, and that's the nice thing about the AVC is at heart, the AVC is a constraint solving engine. So it's designed differently than LOVC. And inherently, a constraint solver reduces mistakes. If modeled correctly, yeah, you're going to eliminate them. But let's face it, that's kind of hard to do. One of the nice things that SAP has done is in later releases, like 1909, they've tried to do some rollbacks of inconsistencies. And last time I tested it, it worked pretty good. From a math perspective, even saying LOVC did rough calculations, in my opinion, is pretty generous to LOVC. They used a very old arithmetic formula, and we'll talk about that in a little while. But AVC will go out to 34 decimal points in its calculations.
Yeah.
So it's much more precise. And if you're, for example, a window or door manufacturer or a furniture manufacturer that does a lot of parametric stuff, that's pretty important to you.
Yes, no, it is. Sometimes things don't work as expected, and it can come down to this rounding or the rough calculations, as you put it.
Yeah, and a lot of times, in order to fix those rough calculations, you've got to actually add function modules on top of them. I have yet to see a case, not saying it won't happen, but I have yet to see a case where the AVC required that.
Right, okay.
So now this next one is my belief entirely. It's I've been in new product development for a long, long time. I started out in new product development roughly 1980 in the engineering side of things. And in my opinion, because LOVC is a procedural engine at heart with a constraint engine built on top of it, it actually slowed down new product introduction because you're trying to figure out how to do things, because there's multiple ways that it can be done. And the AVC, in my opinion, is more straightforward. And anytime you have a straightforward approach, you're going to go faster.
Basically what you're saying, that's more because the AVC is more, starts from a constraint-based approach.
Yes.
LOVC, like I tend to find people start with procedures and later discover constraints and layer that on top, where that probably should be the other way around as well. Okay, so that sounds good.
Okay, and this is the last bullet. LOVC really has been ignored by SAP for 20 years.
Yes.
And in 2016, when they first presented what they were doing to the CWG, SAP came right out and said, we aren't putting any money into LOVC. All of our money is going into the AVC. And strategically, SAP has made this statement their strategic direction. And I give SAP a lot of credit because they have dumped a lot of money into this configurator. Yes. A lot of time, a lot of effort, and they've got a decent product. So I don't know if you've ever tried to do analytics out of LOVC.
Yeah, no, yeah.
It's almost impossible. Yes. I mean, you can do it, but you got to take everything and dump it into BW and then do a bunch of whole weird, funky things. The AVC has made that a lot easier for you, at least in the on-prem side. SAP has pre-bundled what they call these CDS views.
Yep.
And that allows you to do analytics on the VC side very, very simply. If you use a tool like Lumira, for example, it's all visual, it's all drag and drop. Your marketing people can figure it out. They don't have to go get an IT analyst involved. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think so. And probably for many businesses, that could be one of a compelling reason for the AVC, just on that. Having that ability to report on it is huge.
And now I want to switch a little bit, and now I want to talk about it from a technical side. We just talked about it functionally. So what does it mean to the business? Now I want to talk about what it means to the techie. Put your propeller hat on.
Yep, I've got it on. Yep.
So we talked a little bit about this. LOVC is strictly ABAP. whereas AVC is G code is written in C++ with an ABAP layer on top of it. So as you may be aware, C++ is a much more modern programming language than ABAP is.
Yes.
So they're moving forward quite a bit from that perspective. So we talked about math, right? And I was very surprised when SAP told us this, but LOVC used the standard from 1985 to do math. Here we are in 2020, you know, and we're still using stuff from 1985. Well, with the Fraunhofer Institute, which is a mathematical institute in Germany, there's a worldwide arithmetic algorithm standard that was released in 2015, and that is what the AVC uses today, and that's why it can go out to 34 decimal points.
Right.
We talked about this a little bit, that LOVC was primarily a procedural engine with a constraint engine on top of it, which is, you know, the constraint side's declarative, but you could write any number of procedures declaratively or procedurally. You can still do that in the AVC, but the design of the AVC is primarily declarative. So constraints first, preconditions will be treated like constraints, especially on values. Procedures are still procedural, but you should be writing them in a declarative manner. So in the LOVC, you can only use a positive variant table. And this has been a complaint of people since I can ever remember, is let me do negative tables. So let's say, for example, you have 1,000 values in a characteristic.
Yep.
And you want to restrict the domain of that characteristic to only have 800 values.
Yep.
In LOVC, you have to write out all 800 values in a table. In the AVC, you can have a table, a negative table that only has 200 in it. Pretty powerful, actually.
Yeah, no, it is.
In the LOVC world, you can have either a restrictable or a non-restrictable characteristic. In the AVC world, every characteristic is restrictable. So here we're specifically talking about single value, but I also want to talk about multi-value, because in the LOVC, you could not restrict the domain of a multi-value characteristic. Okay, no. You could, using some workarounds.
No, I think that's one basic change that is quite large, because from a consulting point of view, often with just setting up the characteristics in the first place, you know, there's always the question, do we just make them all restrictable, or do we only make the ones we need to be restrictable, but we may not know at that point whether they need to be or not. And so it's always been a dilemma, and there's always in the background, which I don't know if is still actually true or not, that restrictable characteristics had a huge impact on performance. I know in the early days it was always said it did, but I don't know if technology made that less so later. But there was always that sort of question as well in LOVC.
Yeah, that question, from my experience, has gone away in the AVC.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that you can't model something that won't perform well in the AVC. You can.
Yeah.
But there is no, you don't have to take that consideration of, oh my gosh, restrictable is a performance hit.
No,
you don't have to do that anymore.
No, it is what it is now. So that's good.
Well, and the interesting part about characteristics in the AVC is you don't even have to mark them restrictable. You know, you got a tick mark on the characteristic basic data that says make me restrictable.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter if that thing's ticked or not. If the characteristic is found within an AVC model, it's restrictable. And that actually came about because a lot of customers wanted to share characteristics across LOVC and AVC models. Makes a lot of sense. You don't want to just duplicate characteristics, right?
No. So, okay.
This one gets people. In a constraint today, you can do selective inferences, meaning I might have 4 characteristics called out in a constraint and I only infer 2 of them. In the AVC, every characteristic in your constraint will be inferred.
Right. This is the example where I call it sort of a one-way constraint. So you basically have a couple of key fields and it drives you to infer a third characteristic, say. whereas in the AVC, it just goes multi-directional all the time. Is that what we're meaning by this one?
Yep.
Yep. Which is interesting. Like, I can still see use cases for what LOVC does, but there may be different ways of doing that in the AVC ultimately anyway, but okay.
Well, I know companies that, multiple companies that are going to have a problem with this. They're going to have to change their models because they're doing selective inferences today. And if they take that forward into the AVC as it is,
yeah,
they'll get different results.
Yeah, that's in the back of my mind when I look at it. Yeah. Okay.
So one of the complaints about LOVC has been, when you set up an interface design, you really can't reuse it. I mean, you can, if another material has the exact same class and characteristics and so forth and so on. There's a couple of new objects in the AVC that allow you to greatly reuse characteristic groups or groups of characteristics across multiple interface designs. The one thing that I was very, very happy with was how they allowed you to put a characteristic in a group and use it on a model, use that group on a model. And let's say that characteristic really wasn't used by any object dependency in that model.
Yep.
Well, it just wasn't impacted. It's really pretty cool.
Yeah, I did see that, and I suppose, I was trying to get my head around the use of the characteristic groups, for the interface. I think it's obviously a different way of looking at it than what we currently do. So
in LOVC, if you restricted a characteristic and you assigned a value to that thing, and you wanted to go back and see the full domain of values, you had to basically stand on your head and jump up and down and turn around 5 times and say 3 magic words.
Yep.
Not true in the AVC. All of those values, including the ones that are restricted or not available due to other restrictions, are easily displayed. It shows them to you right in the list of values when you do the drop down.
I think that's a big step.
This next one though, this is gonna,
okay.
I've been told this is gonna cause some people problems. I know a couple of companies that it will. You can do what's called using zombie characteristics today, meaning the characteristic's not in the class, and you can store a temporary variable in that characteristic and then reference it later on. You can't do that anymore. If you want to reference any characteristic value, that characteristic must be in a class associated with the model.
Now, it's interesting, and I don't know what SAP's direction might be on that in the future or not, but it's common in new programming languages and even old ones that you can sort of have the concept of the temporary variable. I'm not a programmer, but having that temporary storage and that you just want to store it and reuse it further down or whatever. It's probably, I don't know, surprising that maybe at this point it's got that restriction. It might, maybe it will change or not, I don't know, but I was a bit surprised at that.
Well, I can tell you that within the customer council, back when I was going through it, multiple companies raised that exact same concern. And, one of the reasons that SAP did this, and I'm just saying one of the reasons, is that if you try to download a model into a knowledge base today out of LOVC, and that model has a characteristic that's not in a class, and that model has multiple classes, it will put that characteristic into every class.
Right.
And they wanted to eliminate that delta. So another difference between LOVC and AVC is the processing mode. So, for example, object dependencies now have a processing mode to tell you, am I going to run in Classic or am I going to run in AVC? So to config profiles. There was a lot of debate about that in the customer council, but in the end, that's the way it turned out. And you cannot run a Classic object dependency during AVC processing. So if you have a Classic object dependency in your high-level AVC model, it's not going to run.
So it's just invisible to the model running. I suppose part of that is probably to aid, have a transition path from classic to AVC.
Yeah. So the next one is with preconditions. You know, you can, in the LOVC world, you can make them be procedural or declarative depending on how you write them. Not true in the AVC world. They're declarative. They act like constraints. And that tripped a whole bunch of people up because, you know, a lot of preconditions have the reserved word of specified in them.
Yes.
So if characteristic X is specified, do this. That don't work the same in the AVC.
Yeah,
And
is that where in LOVC you might have that at a fairly low level and it's just meant to be at that object where it's assigned, but in the AVC it becomes a bit more model wide. It will switch stuff off, or is that what you're saying on that one?
well, you know, if you're basically your precondition won't work.
Okay.
You know, I mean, I know companies that are going to have a real big problem moving from their precondition model today because everything uses the term specified. And one of the things that SAP told us is that even in the LOVC world, that just hides it from the UI. It does not hide it from the engine.
Right.
So they wanted to eliminate that and have everything treated the same way in the engine and in the UI.
Right. Yes.
So from an engine perspective, preconditions are actually operating the same way that they did.
Right.
It's the UI that's different. And in the end, though, that means what is the user going to interact with?
Yeah. In general, I avoid preconditions wherever possible. But
yes, I do too. But I know many companies have their whole models built around preconditions.
Yep, that's true. Yep.
They will struggle moving to the AVC.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but you know, if you've ever used the trace within either CU50 or the PMEVC,
Yeah.
it can be overwhelming from a what in the world is this stupid thing showing me, right? And there's very few ways to filter that trace to object types or specific objects or things of that nature. The AVC has a much better filtering capability in the trace. And depending on which release you're on, you're either going to love the trace or hate the trace.
Okay.
If you're on a release prior to 1909, you probably hate the trace. SAP changed the approach for how they ran the trace and how they presented the trace results in 1909, and it's much, much better in 1909. And now we talk about variant functions. You know, you can use a variant function in LOVC, and in the AVC you cannot.
Okay.
And you know, we talk variant functions, and there's really two kinds of variant functions, right? There's a P function, which manipulates characteristics and values, and there's just a straight variant function, which returns reads, and it'll return a Boolean yes or no, right? Neither of them are allowed, and that's because of the C++ programming engine at the base. So you've got to call out and come back in, and they've been replaced with baddies as of 1909. There's a really good presentation out on the document share about those.
The CWG document share. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Here's another one that's going to trip a lot of people up. A lot of people today have procedures in the bill of material that are setting values. So they're maybe inheriting a value from a parent, or they're setting some kind of math. Well, the reality is that's using a hijacked low-level explosion. And SAP said, we're not going to hijack the low-level explosion anymore. High-level explosion is going to be high-level, and low-level is going to be low-level.
Yeah. So is this an example of this would be where we've got a BOM item and we might be cutting it to a certain length. So and that length is determined by a procedure. So, you know, in one case it might be 1.22 meters long, or when the model runs for another set of parameters, it's going to be 2.42 meters long. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah. However, it's more about where that procedure is. You know, even in today's world, if you want to set values with procedures, you should be doing it in the config profile. but a lot of people put it in the intersection of the parent and the child in the actual bill of materials.
Right.
If you put a procedure setting a value in the bill of materials, it will not set the value.
Right. Okay.
So all those procedures must be set in the configuration profile.
Right. Which basically means bringing it up to the higher level.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. And last but not least, you know, if you have an inconsistency or a termination in a procedure, configuration stops.
Yep.
That's not the case when the new AVC runs. Inconsistencies are rolled back to the last consistent state. Terminations right now are ignored, and configuration continues. And you know you'll see it in the trace, so you can address it.
Right.
Some companies are complaining about that because they use that termination as an error flag. Again, it's the difference between a procedural and a declarative configuration engine. So I'm going to stop sharing this now.
Sure. Yeah, I think that was a pretty good overview, actually. There's a couple of areas there that that I wasn't sure about, and that sort of explained it. So with 1909, you know, we've talked about, you know, the release cycle perhaps going out to 2022. So which implies there's stuff coming, but so at the moment, I suppose comparing the AVC to LOVC functionality, what haven't we got yet, I suppose?
There's a couple of big ones. So if you do sales order set processing today in LOVC,
Yep.
that is not in 1909. If you do engineer to order, not in 1909.
Okay. Okay.
So those are the biggest things that aren't there yet. There's a bunch of syntax that is not available at this point in time. And basically that syntax is what you today write in ABAP in a P function.
Yep.
And a lot of that syntax is planned to be put into the constraint syntax.
Yeah. So what's your general take on the AVC?
So I think it's very appropriately named. You know, it is an advanced variant configurator, right? What they're doing is they're fixing a lot of the problems that people have complained about for 20 years. To me personally, I'm kind of disappointed because I was hoping for more than just an incremental update to the variant configuration engine. I was looking for things like graphical configurators and no-code software, things of that nature.
Right.
And we're not going to get that.
No.
At least not in the future.
It'll be interesting to see, I suppose, if that changes in the future. Like, you know, there's a lot of competition out there now, perhaps drive directions as well. But the question I have in my mind is really you know, what's going to compel people to go to the AVC either now or in the future?
Right now, if you're an existing customer, I don't see a large compelling reason to go to the AVC in its current form. I would wait. The AVC is going to be better than LOVC, guaranteed. I'll guarantee that.
Yeah.
So if you're a new customer, a net new customer to SAP, don't even think about going LOVC. Only go AVC. And my understanding is that there are quite a few net new customers coming into the S/4HANA world.
Right.
Now, whether there's enough functionality for them to go completely AVC today, I don't know. But if I was a new customer coming in, I wouldn't even look at LOVC. I'd go straight to the AVC.
Yeah. And the other point I think too is that the AVC is not a free option.
No, you're right. It's got additional license costs, and there's a thread out there on the CWG forums and the configuration workgroup forums in the AVC section that gives the OSS note that has those details in it.
Okay.
The other problem for existing customers is the transition path.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not well defined yet.
No, and I think we'll have a future discussion probably on that. Get our thoughts together on what that would look like, because I think it's an area where it probably needs to be well understood, so that there is a bit of a roadmap for people to follow, to do those transitions. And I think we're going to have a future conversation about all of that anyway. But when I put on my consultant hat, like, I can see there's going to be a lot of work out there perhaps in the future when that starts happening.
Well, and that's a concern I have, is that right now this is kind of like 1993 all over again, right? Back in the day, if you had the variant configuration in your resume, you were you were something else, right? And there were very few people that had that.
Yeah.
And they got paid big money, whether they really knew VC or whether they didn't know VC. We're there again.
Yeah, well, I remember the days when if you could spell SAP, you were automatically a consultant. So, but yeah, so those days have sort of disappeared. But I think potentially there will be these little hotspots, like VC's an unusual piece of SAP anyway. If companies don't use it, they don't care. But if companies do use it, then it becomes a critical piece of knowledge that they have to get somehow.
Yeah, and that's the issue, is how do they get that knowledge, right? And I think we're going to talk about that in a upcoming conversation as well.
Yeah.
But to your point, VC, be it LOVC or AVC, is really laid on top of the base functionality, and the base functionality was not designed for VC. People have complained about APO for years not working well with LOVC.
Yeah.
Right now, I don't think IBP works with LOVC or AVC.
I think there's a few interesting conversations around all those points, because I think things like the IBP are gaining prominence in that area, and then obviously there's all the integration points around that. But I think that was a good summary today, Steve. We could probably close it off there, unless you've got some more words of wisdom that you want to share or comments. But
no, the only thing I'd like to say is, again, please, if you the listener like what you heard, and hopefully this audio is better than our first audio. I think it will be.
That was shocking, wasn't it?
Yeah. Oh, well, sorry, we're not getting paid for this. It's free. It's on our own time. We're doing the best we can. But if you like this stuff, comment and tell us what you want to hear about. Share it. Tell your friends. Get them to join our channel. I would like to leave you with one thing. I said that this is not a new and innovative configurator, and that's, I think, going to draw some fire. But I would like people to start investigating no-code and low-code software, and think about gaming and new ways of selling, and how a configurator might play into that. And we'll continue that conversation a little bit farther down the road.
Yep. So it looks like we've got a lot to talk about in the next few months anyway. So no, it sounds good. So no, thanks for that, Steve. Like, I know you've got a lot of knowledge bundled up in that brain of yours, and it's good to get it out into a different forum. So it's great.
Well, thanks, Phil.
Okay.
I hope everybody stays safe out there amidst all the COVID stuff, and have a happy Easter. This will probably come out after Easter, but I hope you all have a good one. Take care. Always nice talking to you, Phil.
Okay. Thanks, Steve. Catch you next time.
Absolutely.